I'm not here to tell you what to do with this. I'm not going to give you a solution. In fact, I can't give you a solution. But I am also not going to sugarcoat this. Because here's what I think. Here's what I know. Without knowing how I know. He is the president of the Heritage Foundation. He is the architect behind Project 2025, a blueprint so comprehensive, so surgical in its design, that it mapped out the restructuring of the entire United States federal government before a single vote was cast. Before he became the man who designed the engine to reshape America, he was a scholar, a historian, and his area of deep, specific, rigorous academic study was African American history. Specifically, how slaves and slavery shaped America. His master's thesis, completed in 1999 at Virginia Tech, was titled African Virginian Extended Kin: The Prevalence of West African Family Forms Among Slaves in Virginia, 1740 to 1870. His doctoral dissertation, completed in 2003 at the University of Texas in Austin, reconstructed the lives and identities of enslaved people in Louisiana. And what did this man find in all of that research? He found that Black families, even under the most brutal conditions ever imposed on human beings, did not collapse. It reconstructed under the protection of the mother, even when that mother was not their own. He found that matriarchal extended families, kinship networks, and the preservation of West African family structure, that they were intact. They survived even when they were not, again, their own family members. And more importantly, they were acts of resistance and resilience. They were the architecture of survival. The Black mother, according to this man's own thesis, was the cultural axis, the center of the community, and the continuity that refused to die. And then on April 21st, 2023, the centerpiece of his initiative, a 900-page policy book titled Mandate for Leadership: The Conservative Promise, was officially published. But most know this document as Project 2025. And in the foreword of that document, he listed the things that America, in his view, had righteously rejected: monarchy, colonialism, fascism, communism, slavery, and wokeism. He placed slavery and wokeism in the same sentence. A man who built his entire academic career understanding what the Black mother endured to hold her people together, turned that knowledge into a policy weapon. That is not irony. That is intelligence weaponized. And that is where our story begins. Her name was Adriana Smith. She was 31 years old. She was a nurse and someone who spent her life tending to the bodies of others. She was a mother. She had a 5-year-old son at the time, and she was 9 weeks pregnant. In February 2025, Adriana Smith went to the hospital with a severe headache. She was sent home. The following morning, she was found gasping for air. She had blood clots in her brain. She was declared legally dead, brain dead, gone. Under any circumstance in any other country, her family would have been allowed to grieve. They would have been permitted to let her body rest. They would have been given the unbearable but human right to say goodbye at that time. Instead, the state of Georgia said no, because of Georgia's heartbeat law, because the fetus inside her body still had a detectable heartbeat. The hospital was legally obligated to keep Adriana Smith's body alive, not her body, for 4 months, 124 days, machines breathing for a woman who was already gone. Her mother, April Newkirk, said, "She's been breathing through machines for more than 90 days. I should not be burying my daughter. My daughter should be burying me." On June 13th, 2025, Adriana Smith's son, named Chance, was delivered by emergency C-section. He weighed 1 pound and 13 ounces. And then they removed Adriana Smith from life support. She was buried on June 28th with a nurse in honor guard, a white rose, a last call of duty. I do understand the complexities of this case and that Chance was granted an opportunity to life and is here thriving. But I want you to think about that for a moment. Because this is not an abnormality. This is a pattern. The Black mother's body used by the state without consent, without agency, without recognition. Adriana Smith was not the first, and she will not be the last. Let's go back further. Let's go back to the auction blocks, the breeding plantations, the enslaved Black woman who was forced to produce children, not for herself, not for love, not for family, but for property, for the expansion of someone else's wealth, for the growth of an economy built on the extraction of Black bodies. She nursed children that weren't hers. She raised the children of the people who enslaved her. She kept together a community that was being systematically torn apart. Husbands sold, children sold, mothers separated, and still she was the axis. The author of Project 2025 said it himself. He confirmed it in his own research. The Black mother was the institution. She was the cultural transfer. She was the preservation mechanism. And the system knew it, which is why the system has always come for her first. In the film, The Matrix, there was a moment when Morpheus explained to Neo exactly what the Matrix is. He says, "The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth." And Neo asks, "What truth?" "That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you've been born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell, taste, or touch. And then there are the pods, millions of human bodies kept alive, kept producing, kept generating the energy that powers the machine world, without knowledge, without consent, without any awareness that their very lives, their breath, their warmth, their biological output is feeding a system that will never acknowledge them. 400 years of free labor that built the largest economy the world has ever seen. Black bodies work in the fields, building the cities, nursing the children, dying in the wars, generating the wealth without any reparations, without recognition, without so much as an accurate line in a history textbook. The movie, The Matrix, didn't invent this idea. It gave it a name. And here is what the Matrix understands that its inhabitants do not. You cannot ask a battery for consent, because the moment the battery becomes conscious, the moment it understands what it is powering, it stops producing. So the Matrix keeps you alive just long enough, just comfortable enough, just divided enough, just afraid enough. Then you start to tell yourself, this is freedom. You tell yourself, this is opportunity. You tell yourself, work harder, pray harder, contribute more, and then one day it will be different. And generation after generation, the battery believes this because the alternative, the red pill, is a kind of knowing that cannot be unknown. Adriana Smith's body was a battery. The state of Georgia knew she was gone. The law did not care. What matters was her body, that it could still produce. The enslaved mothers of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century were batteries. What mattered was their biological output, their milk, their labor, their children, the capacity to produce, reproduce the workforce that the machines needed. The Voting Rights Act, the small, fragile mechanism that allowed Black Americans to have even a whisper of influence over the machine that runs their lives, that was also dismantled. On April 29, 2026, in a 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court of the United States, gutted the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the law that ended Jim Crow, the law that Black people bled for, the law that says you cannot draw specifically designed lines to erase Black votes. And within 48 hours, Tennessee carved up the only Black majority congressional district in the state, the Memphis district, splitting it into 3 pieces, each designed to be white majority and Republican. By the time you're watching this, Alabama is more than likely to have already passed laws to redraw maps that the court had already ruled as racially discriminatory. Louisiana suspended its primaries entirely. Florida, South Carolina, Mississippi, all moving, all redrawing, all using the Supreme Court's ruling as its permission slip that they've been waiting for. The machine is not hiding anymore. It is operating in plain sight, with paperwork, with legal citations, with a 6-3 ruling, and special legislation sessions, and governors signing bills before the ink on the Supreme Court decision was even dry. The matrix doesn't need to be invisible when the people inside it have been taught not to see it. Now I need to speak of the blood, and I want you to hear me correctly when I say the blood. Pay attention, because if you're thinking of that image instead, you might want to think about made in the blood. The lynchings, the killings, the assassinations, before, during, and after. Medgar Evers shot in his driveway in 1963 for organizing Black voters in Mississippi. The 4 little girls in Birmingham, Alabama, blown up in a church on a Sunday morning. The youngest was 11 years old. Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, Carol Denise McNair, and let us not forget Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., shot in Memphis, Tennessee, the same Memphis, Tennessee that was just redistricted from Black votes days ago. And later, the countless, the unnamed, the known only to their families, who marched and organized and legislated and were jailed and beaten and fired and surveilled and sometimes killed for the simple radical act of demanding that their votes counted, mattered, and they won. They won the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a legislative miracle, a moment where the machines recalibrated. And every generation since have been told, this is what sacrifice produces. This is the proof that the system can change. Keep working within it. Keep voting. Keep the faith. But I want to ask this. What do you call it when the Supreme Court justice can casually place the word slavery next to the word wokeism and call them both things America rejected? What do you call it when people give their lives for a law that is then dismantled by the same court system? What do you call it when the blood of martyrs become the fertilizer for the garden they were never meant to eat from? I call it the matrix, feeding itself with the blood, the energy, the life force of its own resistance. Because here is what the machines have always understood. The most efficient fuel is the fuel that has forgotten who and what it is. The fuel that believes that it is free. The fuel that has been oppressed, that needs to be reminded that its power is its blood. You see, the martyr who dies for the vote generates hope for a community. That hope generates continued participation. That participation generates the illusion of access. The illusion of access keeps the battery connected. It keeps people inside the system. It keeps you voting for the lesser evil. It keeps you trusting the courts and keeps you writing letters to senators. It keeps you one more generation inside the machine. And when the machine decides it no longer needs the pretense, it takes back the concessions, one court ruling at a time, one redistricting map at a time, one Black woman's body at a time. The mothers on the auction block held communities together so that their great-great-great-grandbaby would be grown by way of a life support system, by a state law that sees their bodies as vessels and not people. And the man who sat in the archives, who read the plantation records, who understood what the Black mother meant to the survival of her people, built the blueprint for taking it all apart. I'm not here to tell you what to do with this. I'm not going to give you a solution. In fact, I can't give you a solution. But I am also not going to sugarcoat this. Because here's what I think, what I know, without knowing how I know. The plan is to work backwards, to reverse engineer in order to keep the machine working. Why else would it take another man to speak of recolonization just 2 months ago? You see, this is the first part of a greater plan that is, and it is time for us to take the red pill, the blood pill. It's time for us to fully understand that our mothers have always been here, waiting for us to wake up. It is not about wokeism. That's the part that they got wrong. Their mapping is off, and it is their misstep, which is our opportunity. So this is not a political question. This is not about becoming an activist. This is about us waking up from the matrix and reconnecting to our matrifocal roles. When you look at these things, these three things, Adriana Smith's body being kept alive by a state that doesn't see her as a person, the Voting Rights Act dismantled by a court that doesn't see Black votes as worth protecting, and a man who spent years studying how Black mothers held their communities together through the worst horror in history, and not just American history, and then built the policy infrastructure to dismantle those communities again. When you look at all of it, the entire picture, what are you looking at? A machine that has already told you in every legal document and every court ruling and redistricting map exactly what it thinks you're worth. I don't have the answer, but I believe with everything in me that the beginning of freedom is not a ballot. It is not a march. It is not a hashtag, a lawsuit, a congressional hearing. The beginning of freedom is the moment that you see the pod that you're in for what it actually is. And understanding that if enough people take that red pill, that change has to come, because that's the only time that you'll be able to step into that matrifocal role in order to take back your power.